see, at this point, I'm starting to put in the true local color, which is this lovely medium green. And I've taken this very strong concentration and diluted it a little so that I can put it on in layers and not get too strong in the first hit. So now I'm just going to go in and start to put it in sections where I see a true local color. And this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm done. It just means that I'm at a stage where I feel that I can start to pull this thing together. And there still may be areas that are going to need darks, which we can put in with dry brush as we go along here. And you'll see that all of these shadow colors underneath and all these other layers that I've put on there start to come together and give this avocado the dimensions that it needs. In some cases now I'm even painting the edges because it'll be a light shade of green and it'll give it more cohesion. The blends get a little bit easier to do once you have a few layers of color on the specimen. But I'm trying to alternate areas so that I'm not painting up to an edge that's still trying to dry. Now in the case of this edge here, I have some orange going on, so I've taken and created a little bit of orange to fill in that little spike, and then run it along the edge where I see it, and then kind of blend that into the green while it's still a little wet. Just gentle strokes to get those edges to kind of merge with one another. Now I want to have a little bit more yellow in this green, so I'm going to mix up that and test it. That looks about right. Now you do have to get rid of these edges, so now I'm going to go a little darker with this one side here, especially on this side towards the top. I'm starting to put in some details. Still working with some wash or moderately wet paint. And even if you've put in a dry edge here, like for instance here, I would just go in and then just at the bottom kind of blend it a little bit. And you can always go back and do more, but it won't be so delineated. It'll be a little softer. Be really careful with your edges so that you cover right up to and include the layer that you had underneath. And I might find that at some point I would have to take a magnifying glass and make sure that I have that detail covered. I'm ready to start playing with the dry brush, because now we have to deal with little details, we have to deal with edges. There are all kinds of things that require much closer attention than what we can do with a wash. So what I'm going to do, see one spot here that I could really put some color into. So what I'm going to do at this point is I am going to start to add fine details, clean up edges where there are edges that require attention, and pretty soon we'll have a painted avocado. But this is still in the early stages, so we still have a bit more to do. So I'm probably going to switch over to my number 2 brush miniature at this point and start working on the details. Okay, so I've tried to film this a little closer so you can see the details. I am going to start up in this area here, and you'll be able to see what I'm doing. You can see, for instance, there are areas here where my edges don't quite line up. So these are all things that need to be taken care of. You want to try and use it in a less saturated color than what's in place. So there's some real fine things that are going on in here. I'm probably going to scrub out a few things just to change the color a little bit. So at this point, this is where all the detail starts to work. And this is what takes the most time, because you need to be very patient with it, not try to get it done too quickly, because it's very small gestures that are going to make this. At this stage, it really does require a great deal of testing. And this is a good time to start using your skins, because those are going to be little amounts of color that you can use in order to start to define things better. And now you're working dry brush, so make sure that it's like a drawing technique, so now you want to make sure that you're not putting too much paint down all at once. Alright, so I'm mixing up these colors, and I am working directly from my specimen. Because I can see very clearly what's going on. Now I have this very light area here. You see, that's got to be filled in. So I'm going to go back to my green and make sure that's the color I need and get that edge cleaned up. might need to do a little mini wash in order to get your colors right. Now is the time you can start putting in any very subtle texture that you might see within the painting itself. And if they're too linear, just take your brush and dampen it and then just soften them a little, and they won't be quite so obvious. Okay, so we keep working like this until we're done. But really look at the shapes that you see there. Don't just assume that it looks a certain way. Really look at it and see what it really looks like. So slowly but surely we're starting to add all of the darker details. Now you will notice in some cases, like right along here, it's really very light. And I left it that way on purpose so that when I go back in here and I darken this area with a light shade of shadow color, which is really what it's going to need, I can go over these light areas and it'll tone them back, but they'll still be lighter than this section that I'm going to darken up as I go along. Starting with green, my local color, and actually putting some local color on the other side of this center rib that seemed to appear when I put light on the subject. And again, I am still softening the edges so that they don't create a hard edge. And I'm going to put more shadow color on here after I've got this nice green base underneath. And I'm going to even soften this midrib so that it doesn't jump out at me too much. Now there's a lot of things that are kind of undefined in this area, so we need to clean some of this up. So I'm going to take a very light shade of the green, and then I'm going to just gently go back in here and fill in those areas that are a little too white, because they need to have some color in them. So what I'm going to do next is to soften this edge just by taking the shadow color and going up to it, and this will now disappear. And then I'm going to add more value in the red range, and you notice that the darker this gets, the more contrast I get in defining the edges of each one of the barrettes. And because I'm working relatively dry, I can feather with my dry brush to get things to blend fairly nicely. Notice that in these pockets, I am making it quite dark and then quickly fading it out into the rest of the barrette. And it really helps to create some dimension, and you get the feeling that each barrette overlaps the other. It's the contrast that really helps to create the dimension. So we're just going to keep going like this until we finish the painting. But at this point, we're ready. We're doing all dry brush work as much as possible in order to achieve our ultimate goal.